So the role of the stakeholder group will be to share and vet ideas and provide feedback on proposed outcomes and strategies. They will not be developing the plan itself. Input from the larger community is also very welcome and can be provided in a couple of ways, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Next. This is our agenda for this evening. Tonight we'll focus on defining what we hope to get out of the plan. We'll look at the projections for climate change impacts in the local area, examine the sources of greenhouse gas emissions from our community, and look at future projections. We'll then be asking you what the outcomes of the plan should be, and there'll be an opportunity for discussion where the stakeholder group and others can share some of their thoughts. One other note, this is the first of 4 stakeholder group meetings, and there'll be a larger public meeting at the conclusion of those. Each of these meetings is topic specific, and we'll be sharing the details of what the following meetings are later on. Next. I think Melissa's going to talk about logistics for a moment.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Stark. I'm a planner at Raymond Associates, and I'm just going to briefly walk us through some key Zoom features. This is probably a review for a lot of folks. I know we're doing a lot of virtual meetings these days, but it's always helpful to just point them out. So starting on the left, we have your audio controls. Hopefully everyone is muted and can remain muted while they're not speaking. We've got a large group, and it's just going to help eliminate some background noise. Then moving over, we have the video option, which is great if you're comfortable having your video on, especially if you happen to ask a question. We'd love for you to turn your video on. Helen's going to be talking about comments and how we are going to be addressing those throughout the meeting. But one way we're going to try to stay organized is by using virtual cues like the raise hand feature. Depending on your version of Zoom, that's going to be located by clicking the participants button, which is shown here on the screen, which will then bring you to the blue hand button. For other folks, it's going to be by clicking the reactions button, which is at the bar also on the bottom of your screen. If you can't find the raise hand feature, feel free to use the other virtual cues like the hands clapping or the thumbs up. And please stay muted until someone calls on you. That'll just help us stay organized. Next slide. I think Helen's now going to walk us through comments and folks that are watching from the public.
Right, so later in tonight's meeting, we're going to be posing 3 discussion questions. As stakeholders will be invited to share their thoughts, and also members of the public will have an opportunity to participate, both through a comment period later in the evening and also through an online response form that's available at our webpage here. So if you can make note of the webpage, it's toaks.org/climate-action. That's the page that we're going to be using for most of our communications on this climate action planning effort. The link should be active now, and you can use it to respond to the discussion questions when we get to them. Or if you don't get a chance to do that tonight, that link will be available until for the next couple of weeks. For those participating via Facebook live stream, the link to the form is available on the Facebook page there. We were hoping to do some breakout rooms, but we've encountered some technical difficulties with that, with the number of people. So we won't be able to do that tonight. Hopefully we can integrate some more participatory modes in our future meetings. Tonight we'll be hearing from the stakeholders. We'll have the form available for public input, but we will have an opportunity for public to comment towards the end of the meeting. Okay, thank you. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Walker.
Thanks, Helen, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for making the time to be part of our first of a series of stakeholder meetings about the Climate and Energy Action Plan. I'm just going to start us off with giving each of the stakeholders a chance to do a quick quick introduction before we get into the slides. So just quickly, if you could say your name, your affiliation, why you want to be involved. So I'll do an example. My name's Walker Wells. I'm with Ramey Associates, consultant to the city, and I want to be involved so that we can get excellent input from the community on how we should shape the plan so it reflects the character of Thousand Oaks. So with that as a model, I'm just going to run down the list. So this is all in alphabetical order. So Amy is first. Amy Comans. All right, let's go to Avery.
Hi, my name is Avery Akers. I work with the Conejo Recreation and Park District for the outdoor unit. Love to be involved because, well, first I'm part of the outdoor unit, so it's already part of my job, but love the area, love nature and the outdoors, and hopefully want to leave something better for my kids when I have some.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Ben Kuo.
Yeah, it's Ben Kuo, and I don't have any affiliation here, though. I do a lot of different things. I am faculty at Cal State University Channel Islands. I run a technology news site called SoCal Tech. Also run a Twitter site that a lot of people in the city follow called AI6YR HAM, which focuses on disasters and emergencies. So anyway, I'm very interested in seeing some solutions in the climate area here.
Great. Okay, next is Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Hsu. I'm a student at Westlake High School and a commissioner on the Thousand Oaks Youth Commission. And I'm really excited to be involved because I want to provide a youth perspective on the climate and environment in our city. And I'm really passionate to be living in Thousand Oaks for my entire life.
Okay, great. Melissa on our team is a Thousand Oaks native, so thank you for participating. Next up is Clive Perry.
Hi, I'm Clive Perry. I'm with Sage Publishing based in Newbury Park. And as a company, we're very committed to trying to improve society. That's part of what we do as an academic publisher. But also we're always looking at what we can do as a business to make sure we're both helping to improve the environment, but also minimize our impact on it. And it's something our staff are very committed and interested in. Generally speaking, as a group, we have internal groups focused on this area. And then personally, it's also a topic, the climate crisis, that I'm personally very interested in as well.
Okay, great. Thank you for being here. Danny.
Hi, my name is Danny Chulak. I'm a community member and also ran for city council last year. And part of my platform was making sure that the city of TO took a look at our environment and continuing to protect our environment. So I'm excited to participate in this group.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wilson Hago.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Wilson Hago. I'm founder of Hago Energetics, a startup up here in Newbury Park. I'm interested in generally lowering emissions at the local, state, and global levels. And so we're developing technology to do negative carbon emissions. And I'd like to kind of see what's happening in the city.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Very interesting. Okay, next is Gordon Clint. So we got Gordon on the Zoom before.
Gordon, you need to unmute yourself if you're.
Okay, my name is Gordon Clint, and I'm a member of a number of environmental and climate action groups, and that's kind of why I'm involved. I care about my community, and I want it to have a good future, and that about it.
Okay, great. Next one is two names on my list, Craig Epstein and Matt. The last name I'm not going to try and pronounce.
Hi, Greg Epstein here, Executive Director and founder of Enhanced Landscape Management. We are what we do. We do the environment, so electric equipment and how we can help with the carbon footprint is what we're about and making the change. So looking forward to the future.
Yeah, okay, great. Joan Burns or Steve Moyer? and/or?
Hi, I'm Joni Burns. I'm with Amgen, and I want to be involved because Amgen definitely wants to partner with the city and see if there's opportunities for us to work together towards reducing carbon emissions. And we know that we play a really important role in them, so we're really proud of them. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Lillian Mendoza.
Hi, my name is Lillian Teran Mendoza. I'm currently a senior at Cal Lutheran, but I'm affiliated with Adelante Comunidad Conejo. So I'm basically here to advocate for the Hispanic and Latino community's needs, as well as kind of get them more involved in environmental efforts.
Okay, thank you. Linda Coburn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Coburn. I'm the co-owner of Pedigo Electric Bikes in Westlake Village and Thousand Oaks. And obviously, our business is very pro-sustainability, and we'd like to help the city and the residents of Thousand Oaks enjoy a cleaner, better environment.
Great. All right. Mark Jacobson. I had marked down that I saw Mark. Are you out there?
I just did the Zoom no. I forgot to unmute.
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah. My name is Mark Jacobson. I'm the facilities director at Cal Lutheran University. I'm here representing the university and the university's interest in protecting the environment as my personal interest as well.
Okay, wonderful. Next up is Maya Kanem.
Yes, hi. Hi, my name is Maya. I am a sophomore at Duke, but I am an alumnus from Newbury Park High School, and I'm here to provide a youth perspective and also to consider other underrepresented communities when thinking about environmental issues here.
Okay, great. Michael Schiff. Didn't see Michael before. Okay, let's go to Rick.
Yeah, I'm not seeing him in here right now.
Okay, thanks, John. Go to Rick Fried.
Hi, I'm Rick Fried. I'm the energy manager at the Conejo Valley Unified School District. As such, I'm very interested in the environment, energy conservation, and sustainability, and I'm happy to be on this committee.
Okay, yeah, happy to have you. Okay, and then Rick Schroeder.
Hello, Rick Schrader, president of Many Mansions. Many Mansions is the largest developer and manager of affordable housing in the city of Thousand Oaks. And we're very interested in these policies that may affect our ability to develop such housing and also how it may affect our low-income residents.
Okay, great. R.L. Miller.
Hi, folks. R.L. Miller here. I am a resident of unincorporated Ventura County adjacent to Thousand Oaks. I regard myself as a very long-term resident of the Conejo Valley. I'm also the co-founder of a group called Climate Hawks Vote that pushes for climate action at the federal, state, and local levels. I am the first person ever from Ventura County elected to the Democratic National Committee. And it is a great honor to be trying to put some of the stuff that I advocate for into real life.
Okay, great. Great to have you. A few more folks to go here. Robert Jashinsky. I didn't see Robert previously. Okay, we'll go to Roseanne Witt. Rose.
Roseanne, you're muted, maybe.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Roseanne, volunteer for several climate groups, Citizens Climate Lobby, Chalice Climate Action Team, and the Conejo Climate Coalition. I've had a lifelong interest in the natural world, biology major from Pomona College, and Woolsey wildfire survivor and mother, so I'm very interested in the climate.
And go Sage Hens.
Oh.
I teach out there. I'm not an alum. I'm just on I'm a faculty member.
Who was that?
It's Walker.
Oh,
Walker
okay.
Yeah. And then Shannon Ayer Swanson.
Hi there. Yes,
I am Shannon Swanson. AIRS is I always use AIRS for work. I work in film production, and I was raised in Thousand Oaks and lived in LA for about 10 years and then moved back here to raise my family. I have 2 small children. I'm very I want to be involved because I love Thousand Oaks. I love raising my children here, and I want to see it continue being a really great, clean place to live for the foreseeable future.
Great. Okay, thank you. John, that's the list that I have. I saw a couple other people had stakeholder before their name, but that may have just been some confusion. Is that?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I've renamed some of those. Did anybody come in that we didn't catch?
That'd be Amy
Commons.
Amy Commons, or Robert Jashinsky, or Michael, is it Schiff?
Schiff,
Schiff.
Yeah. And okay, I'm not seeing any of those, so let's move forward. Thanks.
Great. Okay, well, thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks for the good, insightful, but also brief introductions. I think we're going to move right into the kind of the content that we wanted to share with you to just frame up these issues. So we can start with that. Should be the next slide. Okay, so our intent here, and in a minute, my colleague Sammy Taylor is going to go through some of the state policies that really do create a pretty significant infrastructure for a lot of climate-related activity in California. We are unique in this. I do some work in other parts of the country, and they're always jealous that we have so much in place to give guidance and structure for the climate and environmental work. But you know, part of what we're trying to do is to talk about, you know, what is a climate action plan? You know, why do cities put them together? What are they trying to affect? And then really, to what degree can the city influence our greenhouse gas emissions? Recognizing that a number of sources of greenhouse gas emissions come from personal choices that the city is not involved in at all, and also that the city operates within a region, and there are regional agencies that make decisions that have impacts on GHG emissions as well, whether it's the county or Caltrans, and I could keep rattling them off, but try and put some of this into context. But I'm going to start with some of the sort of foundational policies that again really help sort of set up this conversation. So I think I hand it off to you, Sammy.
Thanks, Walker. So hi, everyone. I'm Sammy Taylor. I'm a sustainability planner with Ramey & Associates. And like Walker mentioned, the state of California has really put together a pretty robust framework for climate planning within the state and at the local level. So I'm just going to run through some of the most important policies that impact greenhouse gas kind of planning at the local level, and also kind of shape the state's response and local government response to the climate action planning. So really, climate action planning took off in California in 2006 with AB 32. It was the first time the state set targets to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. That was then extended in 2016 with SB 32, and that set the important targets of a 40% reduction from 1990 greenhouse gas emission levels by 2030 and an 80% reduction by 2050. So those are important numbers to keep in mind. It's what every local government is asked to kind of contribute towards. So we'll keep that in mind as Helen gets into the greenhouse gas emissions profile of Thousand Oaks a little bit later on. So in addition to that, in 2018, former Governor Jerry Brown took it a step further. And although it's not codified into law yet, it is trending that way, and asked us to consider being carbon neutral by 2045. So those are kind of the main targets related to greenhouse gas emissions that the state has adopted and is looking towards. And it kind of shapes its response to these goals by putting together a fourth climate change assessment, which is about the impacts of climate change in California, and its scoping plan, which is kind of the policies and programs that it has in place to reduce its own greenhouse gas emissions, which is also a great place to look at the local government level for ideas about mitigation measures. So a couple of key policies that that were set at the state level that affect emissions at the local level are SB 100, which is the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which sets the requirement for 100% carbon-free energy, electricity by 2045. And this is key because it provides a goal for the electric utilities to provide carbon-free electricity by 2045. This is less important here in Thousand Oaks since we're a part of a CCA and already are able to obtain carbon-free electricity. Pavley Clean Car Standards, which have higher car fuel efficiency standards for passenger vehicles, and two newer ones, SB 379, which asks that local governments consider climate impacts and adaptation in their resiliency planning efforts and in their local hazard mitigation plans, and SB 1383, which is a very new one that has the target of reducing the amount of organic material, including food scraps, that is sent to landfill by 75% by 2025. And that has a really, great potential to reduce emissions, not only because it's a lot of, solid waste that is sent to landfill, but because methane, which is generated from organics in landfill, is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So this isn't only a climate action plan, it's also a climate and environmental action plan. So that, makes us think about other environmental policies that don't necessarily directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but contribute toward a healthier, higher quality environment in Thousand Oaks. And so the state has also kind of crafted these other policies that not only will reduce emissions, but also try to create a more better environment. So those include energy and water efficiency in new construction, which is called Cal Green in Title 24. There's a sustainable transportation bill that tries to create better transportation and transit-oriented development in cities. AB 341, which is again another solid waste related bill, which asks for 75% of solid waste diverted from landfill. That's separate from the organics diversion requirement as well. And so then we have some other landscape related ones, which also touch on water efficiency, the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, SB 606 and AB 1668 also are developing new targets for per capita water use. So those will reduce overall water demand for the state. And that of course has huge impacts in terms of the water energy nexus, but also on water quality and ecosystem health throughout the state. And then the newest one, which is an executive order signed by Gavin Newsom, is N7920, which if you're familiar, asks that fossil fuel powered cars be phased out in California by 2035. So you'll only be allowed to buy zero emission vehicles in California in 2035. So I'll pass it back over to Walker and he'll tie some of this together with how it relates to our climate and environmental action plan in Thousand Oaks.
Thanks, Hemi. So I gave you an idea of the existing regulatory framework that we're operating within that does touch on a lot of these core environmental issues, whether it is energy use or water use or how we manage our waste, and certainly acknowledges that there's a connection there to greenhouse gas emissions on all of those sectors. So this question is, what is a climate and energy action plan? And the intent here is to create a plan that will demonstrably reduce the community's greenhouse gas emissions across these different sectors of purchased energy, buildings, transportation, waste. And then also ideally look at ways to capture carbon or sequester carbon in the urban forest or other natural areas. And it's focused on greenhouse gases, these gases that trap heat in the atmosphere, and really focused on the 6 gases that are regulated through the Paris Agreement and back to Kyoto. Most of the focus is on carbon dioxide and on methane, though there's certainly a discussion of refrigerants that comes up. It's trying to address all of the emissions that in the community reflect the community's values, which we heard some of the stakeholders express. Build on the work that's been done in the past, at the state level by Helen and her team. Look at the different opportunities, rank them, prioritize them, both in terms of time and as well as magnitude of impact, and really look at the cost benefit and the co-benefits that can come from these different strategies. So a lot of times you can kind of get multiple bang for the same climate buck. You can save energy and reduce cost, improve air quality. And then this diagram that you've seen here just shows you the step. There's an inventory, which Helen will talk about in a few slides. You figure out your targets. City Council has already done some of that work for us, given some direction, and you build a plan around it, implement the plan, and then have performance indicators in place to monitor the plan and do mid-course corrections if that's necessary. Next slide. Having a slow dissolve here. Okay. And then the Climate and Environmental Action Plan is a way to think of sustainability in practice. And a few months ago, we did a sustainability session as part of the general plan update process and got into some of these higher level sort of philosophical discussions about what is sustainability and how it's really trying to look at the interrelationships or the dynamic between the environment, economy, and equity, or people, planet, and prosperity. This is sort of the Climate Action Plan is a way to get down to brass tacks and say, what is sustainability in practice? What are things we can actually do to move, in the direction of sustainability? And I think keeping all of these ideas in mind, we want to do things that, reduce GHG emissions, but we want to do it in an equitable way, and it needs to be economically feasible for it, to be sustainable over time. Next slide. This is a helpful, simple yet helpful diagram in going through all of these different options that are out there. And it's really to kind of stay clear on what the city has direct control over, what a city, Thousand Oaks, can influence, and then where it can sort of provide support for things that are happening statewide. So, the city has direct control over the buildings that it builds, how they're operated, the vehicles that it purchases, other things that are purchased by the city, where it gets its electricity from. And I think a lot of work has been done in those, already. City also has, influence over how people build their houses through the energy code and the building code, low water landscaping requirements, has influences over how you manage your waste by providing you with green bins and recycling bins, but it can't necessarily make you do, a number of things. Again, the city can't require you to buy an electric car. It can help you, it can encourage you to by, providing charging stations. And then finally on the support ring, just acknowledging that some things need to happen at the regional level, at the state level, and city can demonstrate its support, but it really needs to be a collective effort. I think with that, I'm going to pass the ball to Helen to go through some of the work that's happened to date in the city, and then to share with you the inventory and just give us kind of a reference point for where we are as we are kind of looking ahead to the strategies and actions for the plan.
Sure, thanks, Walker. So in this diagram, we're showing the elements of the Sustainability Strategic Plan that are underway at the city and their relationship to the Climate and Environmental Action Plan, and also the city's general plan. Our goal is to develop this CEAP in parallel with the general plan over the next 10 months, so that they're aligned and that they're mutually supportive. The key here is the dark green boxes that show the components that have already been completed, including the plans for municipal operations. The light green elements here are things that are underway, drafted or underway. And the blue elements are the ones that will be developed this year as part of the plan. So the future stakeholder meetings that we'll be holding for this Climate and Environmental Action Plan are going to focus on the blue components as well as the energy component that you see there in the light green. Next. I'm going to move to a brief presentation on the local impacts of climate change, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with these. I'm not going to have time to do a full discourse on climate science, and I'm sure most of you are fairly familiar with that. So this is just really a kind of a brief overview for the things that we need to look at as far as impacts, and many of these are already being experienced. Next. So there was a recent study by the Desert Research Institute in which they downscaled a number of global climate models
to generate regional scale projections for this area. And we'll be looking at a couple of the results from that. Next. The study area that they used was the county of Ventura, and the western part of LA County is shown here. And there's a dot there at the bottom, right on the Ventura County, Los Angeles County border there that you see the city of Thousand Oaks. So we'll refer to that in the next map that Sammy was just showing. Go ahead, please, thanks. So one of perhaps the most obvious consequences of climate change is extreme temperatures. And here we're looking at a map showing the changes that are expected in the number of really hot, extremely hot days. There are many different thresholds that people choose for their climate models, and this particular one just shows the increase in the number of days which are going to exceed 95 degrees, and that's a kind of a threshold that's used a lot in agriculture, and also as a threshold in which employers have to take special precautions for outdoor workers. And we're looking there that we're kind of on the boundary of up to about 8 to 10 additional really hot days that we can expect each year. Next. So in addition to extreme heat, we're expecting that average daily temperatures are going to go up. And in this diagram, you can see that that's going to happen all year round. By mid-century, the Los Angeles area is expecting to see about a 3-degree increase in its daily highs. And that's even if we make significant cuts to our emissions. So the white line at the bottom shows current conditions, and then the yellow line above that shows a shift of about 3 to 5 degrees, which we would expect to see even with significant cuts. And if the emissions continue as they have been, or in a business as usual scenario where they're basically unchecked, then we're going to see temperatures 5 to 9 degrees higher than they have been in the past. Next, please. On the precipitation front, the projections are for actually probably a fairly similar total precipitation, but falling on fewer days. And what that means is that we can expect more intense precipitation events. The impact of that is that there'll be less ability for infiltration of that rainwater into the soil, makes it less useful for irrigation, makes it less useful for infiltration and groundwater recharge, and it creates more runoff. That can lead to flooding, and particularly in devegetated areas, it can lead to greater potential for landslides, as we see here. Next. Precipitation also affects our water supply. In Thousand Oaks, we rely on imported water. It comes to us via the State Water Project from snowmelt in the Sierra Nevada mountains north of Sacramento, coming through the Bay Delta area. With warmer temperatures, more of that precipitation will come as rain and less of it will fall as snow. And that reduction in snowpack changes the timing of the runoff and the water supply, and can also necessitate more storage that's needed to create a water supply all year round. And most often we're talking about storage in the form of aquifer recharge. In addition, the higher temperatures are going to lead to more evapotranspiration, and this, coupled with the fewer precipitation events, is likely to lead to increasing frequency of droughts and also intensity of droughts. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. We're all too familiar with wildfires here, an increasing threat due to drier and hotter conditions. Strong winds coupled with drought-stressed trees and vegetation can carry fire all too easily over long distances. And clearly we need to think about measures to fireproof and protect our properties and our homes. Next, please. There are also the impacts on public health, many of them. Extreme heat causes heat stress, particularly in elderly and vulnerable populations and those without access to air conditioning. In addition, higher temperatures promotes ozone production, which leads to more air pollution, and that can cause respiratory problems and exacerbate asthma. Next. So before we continued, we want to know whether you have any questions about these projections or impacts, and then we're going to be moving on to talk about the greenhouse gas emissions from the city itself.
Again, if you have questions, raise your hand so we can see you.
Or you can press on some other kind of reaction button if you can't find the hand. We'll do our best to see if anybody has any. You can always unmute yourself at this point if we haven't spotted you. So
I'm not seeing any questions in here.
okay, so maybe we'll just carry on and we'll get to our discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sammy. Let's go to the next slide. So having familiarized ourselves with some of the negative impacts of climate change, one question that we're going to be asking is what measures should we be taking to adapt to and prepare for the impacts that we've already experiencing and that we will experience in the future. So those are what we would call adaptation and resilience measures, and those are some of the things that we will be looking for to include in the plan. Before we get to that, I want to quickly turn our attention to the question of where our emissions come from and what sources need to be reduced in order to mitigate against further climate change. Next. So here we're showing California's emissions along with the state's existing targets that Sammy already mentioned. Those targets are a 40% reduction by 2030 and an 80% reduction by 2050. With a business as usual scenario shown here in orange, you can see that we're going to miss those targets by a long shot. So hopefully a lot of the policies that the state has already put in place are going to help shift that line down to help us meet the targets. And also, obviously, it's up to cities and counties also to participate in developing their own strategies for addressing emissions. Next, please. The city has developed its citywide greenhouse gas inventory, which is shown here, or at least here we're showing the breakdown of that. This inventory documents the quantity of emissions of the gases responsible for climate change. And these community sources include both greenhouse gas emissions that the city has direct control over and those that result from community activities, which are indirectly impacted by local government, both through local government programs, building codes, implementation of state mandates, planning, development decisions. All of those things have an influence on community emissions. Here we're showing the breakdown of the city's emissions, and you can see that transportation makes up about 50% of community emissions, followed by electricity at 22% and natural gas at 15%. With other minor sources such as the HFCs and PFCs, those are primarily used as refrigerants. And solid waste, which is the decomposition of organics, and some contributions also from water treatment and delivery. This is the 2018 picture. Electricity emissions actually was substantially reduced in 2019 from participation in Clean Power Alliance. I'll show that in just a few minutes. Okay, thank you. So the community has made significant strides in reducing its emissions over the past decade, even as the city's population has grown. So our 2018 emissions were about 13.5% lower than 2010 values. That reduction was primarily due to energy conservation, to a transition to more renewable energy, either through individual installations or through a greening of the grid, and also from improved vehicle fuel efficiency. Next. So in this slide, we're looking at the historical and future community greenhouse gas emissions based on a business as usual model. In other words, assuming no specific further mitigation actions taken by the city. And this slide is really what the climate action plan is about. The transportation sector that's shown in orange at the bottom makes up about 50% of our emissions. Above that, we show electricity in yellow, and you can see there that there's a significant decrease in those electricity emissions beginning in 2019 as a result of the City Council's decision to switch to Clean Power Alliance as the community's default provider at 100% renewable energy. That has really taken a massive chunk out of those electricity emissions. The other large sector that's remaining there in brown is the natural gas sector. And above that, those other more minor ones, refrigerants and waste and water. So in this business as usual scenario, we're looking at emissions that are about, on this model, projected to be 28% below the 2010 values by 2030. So remember the state's target is 40%. So if we kind of carry on this straight line going out, we would probably be at about 28%. And carrying on through 2050. So since the electricity emission reductions have largely been realized already, the remaining ways to achieve further reductions are to address the other major emission sources, in this case, transportation and natural gas. The state will be helping, I believe, with some alternatives to the current refrigerants, and those laws are anticipated to, or regulations will be in effect over the next decade. To address natural gas use, an increasing number of cities in the state are adopting building codes that prohibit or disincentivize future natural gas connections and requiring development to be all electric. Next slide, please. As far as transportation emissions go, these are broken down as we show here. The largest share come from passenger vehicles and then from light duty trucks, which also tend to be personal vehicles. Emission reductions can be achieved through more fuel efficient vehicles, also through a transition to electric or alternative fuel vehicles, as long as that the electricity is supplied by renewable energy. And the other strategy would be to reduce vehicle miles traveled. To reduce vehicle miles, a number of different strategies can be employed, providing more opportunities for people to work and live in the city instead of commuting, opportunities for telecommuting, more walkable neighborhoods, walkable access to services, transit-oriented development, higher density, residential or mixed-use development that allows on-site access to services. So these are some of the things that we'll need to be thinking about. Next, please. So the council has established some working targets that align with those of the states for greenhouse gas emission reductions for this plan. These are the minimum standards that council would like us to reach. And council has encouraged us to aim higher and to present strategies that would exceed these reductions. So that's the current status, and I'm going to turn it over to Walker now. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Helen. So that's the setup. Sort of the policy context, the inventory, I think, show that we are City has made some significant reductions, particularly on electricity, but there's still a ways to go to get to these reductions that have been identified through SB 32. And that's effectively what the City Council has given guidance on, is to be consistent with the current state requirements of 40% reduction by 2030 and 80% reduction by 2050. And the reference year for that is 1990. And so there's some work to be done just to get to the 2030 goal. So we're opening up for questions on what was presented, and then we have some sort of questions that we also want to pose to you as a group. But let's hear what Janet would like to ask.
Hi, yes. Could you tell me whether the chart that shows the reductions includes the fact that there may be more electric cars and there would be less reduction from that, or is it just going forward that everybody's still driving what we're driving now?
So on this business as usual, it does not account for the electric vehicle mix, or the new law that is requiring that, you know, all personal vehicles are electric by 2035. So that would generate some additional reductions, emission reductions. The thought is that, I mean, ultimately we will try to model that, but some of the success of that obviously is going to be based on adoption rate and that the transition, and also maybe it's one of the things that the city might want to look at in terms of providing support for that electric vehicle infrastructure, either through building codes or through public infrastructure.
Thank you.
See, just this question that the chat from Lisa just asking, are incentives being planned to remove existing natural gas? I think incentives could be talked about. You know, this is a relatively recent phenomenon of this discussion of removing the natural gas that, you know, really is enabled by your access to 100% renewable electricity. So not so long ago, you could have a discussion of whether, you know, gas burned at your house was better than electricity, you know, produced in a power plant and distributed over, you know, transmission wires. But now it's pretty clear that electricity is 100% renewable. So these questions are being raised. But I think this is something that could be discussed. You know, what could the role of the city be in this transition from gas to electricity over time?
We have Gordon Clint with a question, and then in the chat, Lisa or Linda Coburn as well.
Okay,
Gordon.
Yeah, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about how the transportation greenhouse gases are calculated. Is it just the amount that's released when people are in the city driving their car, or is that the total amount of greenhouse gases created from maybe driving all the way from LA or wherever they come from?
Yeah, so the protocol, so the way it's done typically is when you do an inventory, you get charged for all the trips that happen within your jurisdiction. So inside of the city, and then half of those that originate in the city and go somewhere else, and half of those from somewhere else that go to the city. So that's the standard way of doing it. So, and, you know, and this is guidance, I think, from the Air Resources Board. So this is kind of what we sort of apply consistently, you know, with other jurisdictions. Let's see what Linda had to say. Oh, okay. Do we know how many passenger VMT would need to be reduced to meet our emission goals? I think we don't know that yet, but we're pretty clear that VMT reduction is, you know, a way to reduce that sort of largest part of your pie of emissions, which is transportation. So we can get people in more efficient cars, in electric cars, but we would also like people to just drive less if possible. A lot of that does get into sort of your land use pattern, and, you know, how many things are walkable distance, you know, how safe do you feel riding your bike, you know, how feasible is it to take public transportation as an alternative? Let's see, Catherine, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, my question tied into what you were just talking about. I was wondering, because Thousand Oaks is such a wide and like large city, how are you going to encourage more people to like use mass transit and like walk to places instead of driving?
Yeah, so this is a active conversation that's happening with the general plan update in these sort of scenarios or alternatives for future land use. And I think the way to think about it is to, more sort of identify the correct places in the city that could benefit arguably from redevelopment or slightly more dense development that could support a sort of walkable type of, community or urbanism, and to sort of, again, look at the places where that's a fit, rather than thinking of a sort of citywide increase in density. I know those conversations are happening, and a meeting on the general plan land use aspect is happening. Is it on the 2nd of February? We have a slide on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
there's a slide at the end. So that one reason that we're trying to hold these in parallel with the general plan meetings, because there's a lot of overlap here, or not necessarily, there's a lot of connection between the two. So what we decide to do with the land use part of the general plan very much ties into, it's the circulation element, and it very much ties into transportation emissions. So it's really important that those discussions take place in parallel with the understanding of how those things are connected.
Yeah. Just seen a couple of things in the chat, and then we'll get to you, Mark. I don't know, is there just a question of breakdown of greenhouse gases from, CO2, methane, oxides of nitrogen, all the other regulated greenhouse gases. I don't know if you have that, Helen, or if it all is kind of rolled up into equivalence. So this is the typical method, is you look at the equivalence of carbon dioxide.
Yeah, these are all CO2 equivalent.
Yeah, CO2
so.
equivalents. And then I would just, off the top of my head, like the majority will be coming from carbon dioxide from combusting fossil fuels. The methane would come from landfills or, decomposing organic waste. And oxides of nitrogen, a lot of that is sort of coming off of sort of agricultural processes and things like that, but relatively small. I think this could be helpful before we go to Mark, is just to explain a little bit more about the drop in greenhouse gases associated with electricity through Clean Power Alliance. So the question is, are we getting, if all the electricity that you receive through Clean Power Alliance is generated without greenhouse gases? So are you on 100% renewable option?
Yes, maybe Sammy, if you could go back one slide or so, you can see that. So this yellow, this dip in 2019-20 basically shows what happened when we went on to Clean Power Alliance, and the council chose the 100% renewable as the default option. So currently about 75% of the city is on 100%, and the other 25% is because you have an option. That's just the default. So people can opt out of that program. They can go back to SCE and go on grid electricity, or they can opt to a different program within Clean Power Alliance that has a lesser proportion of renewables. Like there's a 50% and a 36% renewables plan. So this kind of represents that makeup. As I said, I think something between 75 and 80% of people are still on the 100%, but there are some that are on a 50% and some on a 36% and some that are on SCE's grid supply.
All right, Ben, thanks for putting in that information on the SCE rebate for heat pump hot water heating. And then let's hear from Mark. You've been waiting a little while.
I only had one comment about this slide about transportation. It's extremely shocking to see the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I understood that there's a lot of commuting and a lot of driving, but those are significant numbers that I would have never guessed. So yeah, that's the only comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, Sammy and I are working with Santa Clara County, and you get these unbelievable, hundreds of millions of VMT per year or something. It's kind of mind-blowing how much we drive around.
Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Yes.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting because often the strategies that that people propose will be things like, you know, let's do more energy efficiency in buildings, or you know, reduce organics in waste, and all of these things are important. And to get to our ultimate targets, we have to do all of them. But if you really want to address the big chunks first, you have to look to transportation. I mean, it's just staring you right there, 50% right off the bat. So, you know, that would be the big one to tackle for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Let's see. Oh, Linda, you're on mute. Sorry.
I just wanted to agree with what Helen said and the previous speaker, that, you know, we could talk about things like land use management and denser cores and things like that, but those are really long range things that take a lot of work, and it doesn't, you know, changing the current mode, you know, we've all, you know, Thousand Oaks is only going to grow so much, and the houses are not going to move anywhere. So we need to figure out how to get people from their place, you know, to where they shop and where they go. As someone who's in the bicycle business, I could tell you that our biggest, the biggest challenge we get to people riding bicycles more is that they don't feel safe doing it. And they don't feel like they can get where they need to go safely and easily. We're trying to provide the easy part, but the safe part has to come from the way our roads are planned. And I know the city of Thousand Oaks has done a lot with bicycle paths and bicycle lanes, but I think that, you know, if we get this, if we looked at that, just that 45% of passenger vehicle miles, and could get some significant reduction in that just through, you know, making it safer for people to ride their bikes or walk where they want to go, then I think we'd have a really big hit on our hands. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right. Well, we wanted to just share a little bit about, and we kind of already got into it, is sort of ways of achieving, you know, environmental sustainability. And what we're trying to focus on tonight is sort of the big picture, like what are the outcomes that we're looking towards. So, you know, we talked about reduced VMT as an outcome that we'd like to see to reduce the emissions related to transportation. But then Linda, you also talked about another outcome, which is, you know, feeling safe while cycling, or you know, or it being, someone mentioned about the public transportation, you know, that it's convenient to use public transportation. So, you know, when the plan is put together, it might look something like this. You know, if you want to reduce VMT, you need to improve amenities for transit riders. You need to have a connected and safe bike and pedestrian network. And then also to concurrently be pursuing, you know, compact misuse development in appropriate locations that combined could lead to a reduction in vehicle miles traveled. The quick fix for the vehicles is to make them all electric and charge them with electric power, but we need to get that electricity from somewhere. And then we still have cars, you know, and congestion and hazards for pedestrians and cyclists. So, you know, of course, we need a blended strategy, electric vehicles, but also a pattern of living that reduces the need to drive in the first place. Okay, is the next slide, Sammy, have the questions we wanted to pose to the group? Yes. Okay, so I think we have 3. Maybe it's helpful to see all 3 of them at once and then go back to the first one. I thought we had, yeah, okay. All right. So try and take these one at a time. And so this first one just talks about these outcomes. So a number of you talked about concern about the natural environment, you know, providing a livable earth for you know, for your children or future generations. We just had a bit of a discussion about vehicle miles traveled. So I'll just open it up now on the kind of this bigger picture topic of just outcomes that people might like to see. So the floor is open for thoughts or comments. Arash. So from Arash and then Danny.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a lifelong resident of Thousand Oaks. For me, what I would like to see as a result of this plan would be that to truly leave a city better for my kids than even the city I had while I was growing up here. Something where the environment is taken care of, where they're not worried about wildfires every year, constantly having to be evacuated due to that, and power outages as a result of it. So just something better than even what I had growing up is what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And Danny?
I think for me, it's a little bit more abstract, I guess, but I think an education component, I think will be really important for me to see in this plan. So what steps is the city going to take to educate the public about ways to be more sustainable, or just to provide information on programs the city has as far as sustainability is concerned? So I think, you know, the city can make a lot of decisions, but if we don't kind of rope the public in, I think that's one of the most important things for me.
Okay, sort of education and then really engagement or participation. All right. I'm going to go to stakeholders first, but I see the other folks who are in line. So Catherine, at the top of my list of faces. So
Yeah,
go right ahead.
I would like to see like an environmental justice aspect incorporated when we talk about sustainability and about the environment in Thousand Oaks, because many neighborhoods in Thousand Oaks are affected like disproportionately. So I really think that we should consider that. And then because I'm a youth, I think that a lot of the decisions that we make in this group and like in the general plan will affect me in the future. So I really hope that like the decisions and the choices that we come out are like very sustainable. So in the future, I don't have to deal with like the charts that were shown earlier. The consequences of climate change really impact me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, you mentioned environmental justice, and there's an equity issue just of the burden that's transferred between generations. So, you know, there's a temporal aspect to equity, not just a sort of an immediate, you know, who has burdens and who has benefits. So it's a great point that you don't want to be sort of handing you and your generation a bad condition that, you know, you need to address. There's a responsibility to take action in the moment. Okay, Rose?
Am I muted? No. Okay.
Nope.
I would like to see the city have a local water supply, or try and create some sort of water resiliency so that we're not so dependent on imported sources. And I'd also like to see a program to encourage a buy local food program. We have, since we're so close to agricultural areas, rather than shipping so much food in, we could reduce a lot of transportation costs and GHGs related to transportation if we encourage our schools and our municipal agencies and other services to buy local food, so that we don't have to worry about supply chain disruptions in emergencies. And we can just reduce GHGs as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, I had a few things. One was I was hoping that we could get some major impact out of this group rather than just small things. You know, I think there's a lot of incremental stuff, but it'd be nice to look at big things. Another couple of things is guidance and incentives. And one particular area that I saw actually last week is there's a lot of folks who have resources but don't know about them, and how the city can help that. The examples, there was an issue with a family in the area who had no power, and their son was dependent on power to survive. And it was and they were unaware that they could be medical baseline, that the power company could have provided batteries and all that. And it was almost a disaster for them, looking for someone to give them a generator. And I think there's a lot of people like that who are lower income, who could qualify for free batteries, for example, for whole house batteries, that just aren't aware of those programs. How can we help those folks? Because most of us here are probably more educated about those options, but there's a lot of people who don't have the time for meetings and don't have the resources.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, Rick, you're up.
Yeah, I'd like to see a couple things. One, I would love the city to really step up its commitment to public transportation. Our low-income residents really need that transportation, but the existing bus service or dial-a-ride just really is not sufficient. So some of them do have to buy cars, and again, public transportation would be better. And also, I'd like to see this really dovetailing with the discussion on the general plan amendment, in terms of getting areas that would allow higher density housing and open up the areas for more multifamily housing, because I think that also really plays into it.
Okay, thank you. Gordon?
Yeah, on that line, I think we need to look at our transportation greenhouse gases, and we also have to look at our housing and jobs imbalance. We got a lot more traffic coming into Thousand Oaks of commuters that work here that can't live here, and therefore we need that housing that's really affordable, so that more and more people that are working here that want to live here can actually live here, afford to live here.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I'm going through the stakeholders first, but I do see everybody else who's waiting patiently, so thank you for that. Maya was next in line.
Yes, I just kind of wanted to reiterate Catherine's point. I think that environmental justice should be a centerpiece to this plan, and I think in doing that, I'd like to see more public health data and data on how the environment is affecting public health in Thousand Oaks, especially because health is one of the biggest indicators of environmental justice, and communities that are more marginalized often experience a lot more detrimental health outcomes. And then I also think that education is really important for especially when it comes to lower income communities where there are a lot of resources that could be there. And then finally, public transportation is a big thing. I volunteer at a free clinic that serves low-income uninsured patients, and a lot of them don't have transportation. That was a huge issue during the pandemic, and before then as well. So I think that's something that should be addressed.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, next on my list is Clive.
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo what everyone has said, and particularly the points about environmental justice. But I think also what we need to think in the plan is, how do we sell it and get people really involved in it? So I think, how do we relate it back to actually improving the quality of life in Thousand Oaks, not just on a narrow basis, but making it a better place to live. So even those people who aren't so motivated by specific issues like environmental justice, or can see the sort of importance of getting the concentration of CO2 down, can see it as something that is just making Thousand Oaks a better place to live. So finding ways of really getting everyone on board this, not just those people who are motivated in meetings like this.
Okay, great. Shannon, I skipped over you as my screen went moving around when we moved from slideshow mode to, anyway, you're
No
up.
problem. Thank you. I think a lot of the ideas and things that everyone has said is really great. I agree with Danny and some of the others that have mentioned that education, I think, is going to be really imperative to help get the community kind of in line with each other. And if we have ideas or suggestions about that, is that something that, as the the stakeholders, we should email anyone in particular, or if we have suggestions about education or outreach or anything like that?
Yeah, well, there's a couple forums. So there is suggestions. There's the, I may need some help here from
Walker,
Shannon.
can I jump in here?
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So you all have my email, I think, jbrooks@tokes.org. One, we've got a form here that you can fill out afterwards as you're thinking of things. It'll all get entered in, and all of the members of the public, and we'll be putting it out in our next e-newsletter so that everybody will have a chance to enter their information in there. But you can also connect with me directly if it's something lengthy that doesn't fit easily within that process.
Thank you. May I say one other quick thing?
Yeah, go right ahead.
I've been listening to our city council meetings that are made open to the public. And I know there's a lot of talk about building new construction and developments. And one outcome I'd like to see from the group is just that that the plan kind of incorporates how our buildings should hopefully be as clean and environmentally friendly as possible, especially because we don't have lots of new developments previously. It'd be nice to see that when we finally actually make a big change to the Thousand Oaks Boulevard, that we're doing it in a really, really great way to kind of be a leading example to other communities that might be like us and, you know, developing in a different way. That's all.
Great. Okay. All right. Not seeing any more stakeholders. Let's do a quick run through the rest of folks. So yes.
Yeah.
R.L. Miller.
R.L. Miller.
Yes. Hi. Let's go to you.
It took me a moment to figure out that I needed to raise my hand in chat or in the participants tab. So I'm coming up with 4 different areas that I see as needing work. First is density, which other people have mentioned, and we do need to think about it. Second is at schools. There is some real specific education that should be done. Kindergartners should not be walking to school alone, and high school seniors certainly might wish to drive their new cars to show off, but almost everybody else should be walking to school if they're able to. And I believe that most of our schools are within walking distance of most families. And so there are some real specific things that could be done to educate parents about walking to school safely, and why it's actually better for children's lungs than having moms idling their cars around school pickup time. Third thing I wanted to mention was simply planning for electric vehicle infrastructure. And I don't know if the city recently went through this process or if it's still going on, but basically charging stations, lots more charging stations need to be built here, there, and everywhere. And I may have had a 4th thing, but I don't remember what it is right now. And that's why we have the comment form.
Yes. All right. Yes. And please, please use the comment form. It's another way to capture things.
Oh, 4th thing is microgrids.
Yes.
Yeah, we do need to talk about resilience after wildfires, and the fact that, we're in a high wind corridor, and Southern California Edison is going to keep on cutting off power. And so microgrids are going to be part of an answer to that.
Yeah, I saw David kind of David Newman leaning into the microgrid conversation. So pass it off to you.
Yes, thanks. Well, in the micro category, one thing I think we could do in fairly short order would be to enact a ban on internal combustion engines in leaf blowers, small lawnmowers, other small landscaping devices. This has been done successfully in Ojai. They started with a pilot program in the city's public works department that was much more of a success than even the advocates expected, and then went to a citywide ban, and that's worked out pretty well. And the larger landscaping firms in that city have adopted it. And I'd like to see something like that done here and eventually countywide as well. I'd also like to concur with the sentiments that were raised by Catherine Hsu and many others about environmental justice. I'm a planning commissioner here in TO, and I can attest that in 6 years, virtually every project, especially larger ones that we consider, are CEQA exempt. So we don't have many discussions about environmental impacts, let alone impacts on the most vulnerable among us. And perhaps we should be having more of those discussions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Greg Epstein, it sounded like your enhanced landscape management was looking at some of this electrification of equipment. If you're still out there. We may have lost Greg.
He had to leave earlier tonight.
Rose, is your hand up because you have some?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
So I wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that other people have said. Shannon talked about making our buildings as clean as possible. I think that right now is the optimal time to do that because the state has mandated that we make available land, rezoning land for new buildings and apartments, and we're talking about density. And so if we put in place ordinances for clean buildings, specifically all electric buildings that eliminate gas connections, I think that would be a tremendous savings on greenhouse gas emissions. Piggybacking on what RL said with regard to EV infrastructure, if we could provide incentives for employers to provide EV charging in their parking lots for their employees so that we could charge vehicles during the day when the sun is out, rather than expecting employees to charge in the evenings when the sun isn't out. I think that could help our energy efficiency as well. And I also wanted to put in the plug or support for microgrids. I'm lucky enough at my home to have solar panels and a battery charger. And as a result, I'm not having blackouts when the last one, when 20,000 people in our county did. So I think that we should be citing strategic places throughout the city, specifically starting with sensitive places like hospitals, community centers that act as shelters, evacuation shelters in wildfires, to make sure that those really important sensitive places have power no matter what. And then figure out where else we can put microgrids throughout the city in a network so that all neighborhoods have places where they could store critical medication or food supplies or whatever. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to put up the next question, but we're not going to, I'm going to get to the folks who raised their hands. So let's hear from Cindy.
Hi, thank you for a great presentation. I just wanted to echo the request for sort of environmental equity and an impact metric, specifically for people with disabilities and the aging population. Much of what I see in the general plan revolves around Thousand Oaks Boulevard, yet there's so much sprawling city and single family dwellings that is also in need of access to public transportation. So I think a way to measure that is impact by demographic, and definitely including people with disabilities in our aging population. And the second thing is how can we as advocates and people at the city model the behavior that we want to see from the rest of the citizens in our community. So those are 2 points.
Great. Okay, thank you. Kyle, you've been very patient. And then we'll go to Kat, and then
this is a really easy forum to be patient in because there's some really outstanding ideas here. You know, back to the question about what I would like to see out of this plan. Someone said this earlier. The numbers about transportation are astounding to me, and really doing a lot of self-reflection right now. And I think that any plan like this runs the risk of trying to be everything to everyone and solve all problems. To me, I look at that chart and that data and say that transportation clearly is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in this community and is our biggest opportunity to make the change, much in the way that going to the Clean Power Alliance did on the electric side. And so much of what we're talking about, whether it's more density, whether it's better access to public transit, whether it's making you feel safe walking to school, all of that is related to transportation. So I would like to see this plan really make comprehensive plans to address that piece of it almost above everything else, if nothing else, rather than kind of watering down everything. And then the second thing I'd like to see is kind of piggybacking on what Danny had suggested, which about this idea of education is so critical. I would love to see the plan for outreach. People are it's all well and good for us to, this group will read the policies, this group will go on the website and follow social media, but 98% of the people in the city won't even know that this is happening. And it's going to require that many people to make this difference. And so I'd like to see what the outreach plan is across the city beyond social media, particularly to people who English may not be their first language, or people who aren't readily on social media and have access to technology, to our elderly, to the older folks. So that is the kind of the second piece of what I'd like to see, is what that outreach plan is. And
Okay.
thank you again for this. This is really an exciting group to be a part of.
Well, thank you. Okay, Kat, you're up.
Thank you. I want to echo everything Kyle just said. It's really exciting to see how many people really care in this community, but to know that there's so many more that have no idea that this is even happening, and their contribution to it. So it's really critical to think about that. I just want to say that, I know reducing VMTs is going to be hard, and it's going to take a lot of different strategies in a lot of different areas, including much of what the general plan update involves. But I think that if we can, what I'd like to see as an outcome from all of our strategies, is getting to a place where we can be net zero by 2050 or maybe even 2045, the way that Newsom has set up for us. So I'd like to see strategies that are cross-cutting and bold and can get us to an even more ambitious reduction scenario. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing it back to outcomes and the topic of question number one. And so by now, you hopefully all have been able to see the second question and give a little bit of thought to that. So just what other things should we be looking at? And because there's a risk of only looking through the lens of climate, and then you can get a sort of blind spot across other topics. For example, on the vehicles, you could just be like, make them all electric and we're done. And you'd say, well, then we still have cars, and cars are hazards for, pedestrians and cyclists, and wide streets, people don't walk down them. There's health implications. So, we want to be thinking about the full suite of options. And then a number of you in the introductions mentioned the natural environment and, liking to be outdoors. And so, there's certainly that quality in Thousand Oaks that, is valuable. And then, trees and landscapes and soils are a way to sequester carbon. So there's a way to sort of connect those dots between climate action and just open space preservation. All right, I'm going to keep bringing in people who've raised their hands. So first, Arash, is your hand still up, or do you have something else that you wanted to say? Or is it just up from before? Arash may not hear me. Or, okay. And then let me go to Gordon first, and then Marianne, I'll go to you. So Gordon.
Yeah, it has some connection with climate, but mainly I'm concerned about our solid waste generation in the city. That's something that we really could work on reducing. It has a lot of relationships to the whole consumption and which all relates to climate change in a way, but that's something we can actually deal with in reducing that by figuring out a way to give an incentive to people who generate very little waste that gets picked up compared to those that generate a lot. And right now, it seems everybody basically pays the same, whether you fill your barrels to overflowing, or you just have a little bit that you put out once every few weeks.
Yeah, so what you're describing is sort of a preferred approach by the sort of the waste management advocates called pay as you throw. So
yeah,
you would pay for what you throw away, and then you would incentivize people to throw away less by either letting them opt into a smaller garbage can, or in a more technologically advanced world that they would weigh your trash before it goes into the truck and you would pay based on weight. But I'm not sure, Helen, where the city's franchise agreement is in terms of being re-upped, but these are the kind of things you could negotiate with your waste hauler about, when the agreement is up for renewal.
Yes, it's actually very timely. So we're in the process of evaluating proposals as a response to our request for a new franchise agreement. So that will be happening in about 2 months from now. Council will be considering the award of a new agreement. So yes, these are certainly things to look at in formulating that new agreement. So appreciate these comments.
And there was a question in the chat about the organics diversion and management as well, the 1383 requirements. So
okay, I'll take a look at that. But yes, the new agreement, which will start at the beginning of next year, 2022, will have organics collection for everybody.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Shannon.
I'm not so excited about the organics, but that's really great. I think it'd be really neat when we talk about, or when education is implemented for the city, especially in the future as we might need to decrease our water consumption. I think it would be really great if the outreach and education involved landscaping that is bee and butterfly friendly. I know that the National Wildlife Federation, you can register your yard as a natural habitat, or it'd be kind of neat if the city, maybe as part of their outreach, allowed kind of a similar program to help people be water wise and also have friendly
pollinator friendly.
Yeah. And then I might be mistaken on this, and maybe this is already happening, but do we have a citywide ban on poison for rat control that is banned?
I don't know.
I'm not sure, but
so
that
anticoagulants, the anticoagulants are, but that's under the new state regulation. The city itself has some regulation on the use of anticoagulants in general.
Okay, good. I know some people still use them, and I know they're so bad. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I saw Clive. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to chime in on water as well, and we actually just put in a wildflower garden ourselves, and they look very nice. But more generally, I think water is important because, I mean, in itself it costs money and costs resources to produce, so it is a contributor obviously to greenhouse gases, but also it is going to become an increasingly scarce resource, and also locally, because we have little storage, and we are, as I understand it, very dependent largely on one sort of resource coming down from the north. Our water security is low, so I think more we can do both in terms of becoming more water efficient and increasing storage is something that will be both environmentally beneficial, but also risk mitigation for the future.
Muted myself. Someone else had mentioned storage and sort of local water security, so I think that's an important topic. Okay, on to Catherine.
I had a question regarding like a prior question or comment. So I know that Senator Stern like proposed, or I forgot if it was Senator Stern or a different senator, proposed the anticoagulant bill. But I was wondering, like, why are we still seeing these like rodenticides around our community? Are those like exceptions?
Well, I would guess it's an issue of regulation. So probably, like it's probably quite difficult for the city to enforce those regulations. I imagine companies might be, based in a city that's not Thousand Oaks, but called by somebody who has a rat or mouse problem in your city. So this is, these are just classic problems that, policies can get adopted, but then the implementation is another thing entirely. I don't know, Helen, if there's anything else.
Well, I would say that just because there are bait boxes doesn't necessarily mean that they're anticoagulants in the bait box. So there There are certain other poisons, I think, that are allowable. It's the ones that build up in the food chain that are not allowable, and that where the animal takes a significant amount of time before it dies, and then other animals predate on it, etc. So there are certain poisons that are still permissible, but it's the anticoagulants, a certain class of those that are not permitted. So it's a little bit difficult. In fact, we will be kind of spreading the word about that law in general, and then maybe people that are unaware of it. It's relatively new. It just rolled out at the beginning of this year, I believe. So, but just because you see a bait box doesn't necessarily mean that that's what it has in it, but certainly there's room for more education there, no question.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Danny.
Yeah, so I heard some people already mention pollinators and encouraging, bees and things like that. I know the city of TO right now has an ordinance kind of restricting home beekeeping unless you have a large enough property where the hive is, set off from other people's property. So it's kind of a specific point, but I would like to kind of look at that and see if there's restrictions that could be relaxed to encourage more people to keep bees on their properties.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, we need them or the whole food chain collapses. So for some reason, just coincidentally, I've read a book about bees and a book about butterflies, and both novels. And yeah, I didn't even know what I was getting into. I bought a Barbara Kingsolver book, and then lo and behold, it's about butterflies. So it's on my mind. All right, let's see. On the stakeholder front, I have Rose and Gordon, and then I'll get to the rest of the public. Oh, Ben just jumped in. So after Ben, I promise. Marianne, you'll be next after Ben. Okay, Rose, Gordon, Ben, and then Marianne.
Okay, so on the education front, I would like to see some programs developed or some classes developed to help residents learn about regenerative gardening, to capture rainwater, improve our soils for filtration. Also, with regard to the bees, butterflies, pollinators, etc., one of the biggest challenges that they face are the use of pesticides. So maybe we could do some public awareness, information campaigns, education about alternatives to pesticides that would go a long way to protecting our pollinators. I assume that there are climate change related curriculums in CVUSD at every grade level. If not, I would hope that we could jumpstart that program so that we're educating our kids so they will be better stewards than we are. And the last education issue that I wanted to bring up is a public information campaign to discourage idling of internal combustion cars so that we can eliminate emissions from cars that aren't even going anywhere.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Gordon? I have to get you unmuted.
Yeah, I already spoke. If you're
okay.
calling me.
Could you unraise your hand?
How do you do that?
I think you just did.
I just did it. Yeah.
Thank you, Melissa.
Does that do it? I don't know.
I've lost you. Anyway, Melissa did it. Okay, Ben.
Okay, just a real quick one, just as a resource, I have been a backyard beekeeper, so if we do discuss any of that, I can tell you a lot about that. And I got the fun experience of being told to move my beehive because of my neighbor. And so I don't have anything here, and they're all in Camarillo. So Camarillo has lots of bees, but you guys don't have any.
All right. Well, my friend Dean Kubani wrote the apiary zoning code amendment for Santa Monica, which I think is a pretty good example. So maybe that's something we can look at. He's also a beekeeper, so there was a little personal incentive. Okay, Marianne, thank you for your patience.
That's okay. I agree with Kyle. There's a lot of good stuff that's been said. So what I would like to see come out of this is community building. And if you think about times of crisis, often communities can be built out of that. So if there is really strong messaging about a shared sense of purpose, I think that that can go a long way. I personally think that cars are a huge alienating factor in society. And, you know, I did one of those walk to school programs at my kids' elementary school when there were three bikes in the bike rack, and then there were 30 bikes in the bike rack. And going back, now my kids graduated from high school, there's still 30 bikes in the bike rack. So what I'm hoping that the city can do is actually give tools to activists. So it's not just all city programs, but this is how you interact with your neighbors on this. And so if you're talking about, you know, a shared community agricultural buy in your cul-de-sac, or setting up a walk to school program, or, you know, just even things like a leave your car at home day, and this is how you talk to your neighbors about it. So I think that even though we're like a very small percentage, all of us care, and the city should capitalize on our activism and how we talk to people who are outside of this bubble.
I think that's great. I mean, you know, a lot of sort of behavior change comes from sort of the emotion, you know, like we understand it intellectually, climate change, but then the desire to act is often, again, more through relationships and caring. Like you said, you care about a community. So thank you for that. Janet, you've also been very patient. You're up. And we'll go to Kat and then Ivy.
Thank you, Walker. You did touch on something that I've been wondering about, and that is how many communities in other countries are doing mass tree plantings to sequester carbon. And I haven't seen anything like that in our plan here for the city. So I'm hoping that's something that might happen. Also, gray water systems. I have not researched that, but I do know that some communities are utilizing gray water systems, and perhaps that's something that, you know, we have solar here too. That would be something we would be willing to install if the city could allow it. Roseanne mentioned rainwater capture. So if there was more information and education on that, we kind of do it with our rain barrels here, but I think there are more professional methods of doing it that I would like to learn more about. And another thing that I wanted to mention for those who are talking butterflies, Supervisor Parks held a Zoom session last week on monarchs. And it's very important that you know not to buy tropical milkweed. It is not a native milkweed and it is not good for our monarchs. So that's
good
all.
to know. That was in the book I just read.
Yes.
Loss of milkweed, so good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are my suggestions.
All right. I think Kat's next. Maybe.
Man, pretty much everything I wanted to say has already been said, but I went to the same thing that Janet went to, and the stat that they gave us was that there's a 95% likelihood that the Western population of monarchs will be extinct. I forget what the time frame is, but it's fast. And I mean, the population this year was only 2,000 that they counted. So it's dire. And I think, you know, including nectary sites and overwintering sites, like that could be in our landscaping ordinances, specifically monarch species, so like milkweeds. But I want to talk about biodiversity loss, identifying key wildlife linkages here in the city, and doing things like dark sky ordinances like they have in Ojai, wildlife friendly lighting. Someone already mentioned banning rodenticides, and I'm not sure where we fall on that, but pollinator friendly landscaping I mentioned, and also stormwater management, slowing and infiltrating runoff on things like bioswales to capture those really heavy flows that we're expecting to get because of climate change. And then just a quick plug for reducing plastics and education about plastic use. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ivy.
So I'm a resident, but I'm also the current chair of the Thousand Oaks Youth Commission. And I wanted to mention that last year at our biannual Youth Leadership Summit, we got feedback from local youth, and we heard a lot about conserving our environment, but mostly like our green space, which is unique to our area. Youth were very adamant that we keep it, and especially because we heard a lot about the development of new housing in the area.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. All right, I saw Clive jump back in.
Mine was delayed for the last question, but the other area I wonder whether we could think about is coordinating with the Economic Development Department on how do we encourage more green environmental businesses. And there's a real potential for economic development coming from organization, new technologies and services that are supporting environmental objectives. So how could we encourage those types of businesses in Thousand Oaks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there is definitely a green economy and workforce development opportunity. All right, we'll keep everybody in line, but this next question is just tilting more towards sort of adaptation and resilience. So, Helen outlined a number of the issues, heat, fire, water shortage, potential, I guess it was sort of landslides, soil instability after fires, and some of the concerning things on the horizon. So this is to just get us thinking also about the need to adapt to the climate that's already in the process of changing. Happy to take questions or comments on that, and then I'll just dive back into the list. So let's go to, where did he go? Bob, there you are. I lost you there for a second. Yes, Bob, unmute. Still muted. Can we help get Bob off of mute? For me, at least, Bob, it's down in the bottom left. And there's a little microphone.
Yeah.
You got it.
Okay. Yeah, I have a bit of a bone to pick with the waste management trucks that we see everywhere. The sides of the trucks proclaim that the natural gas that they run on is both clean burning and renewable, but neither one is actually true. Natural gas is not clean burning and it's not renewable. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Okay, back to our stakeholders. Ben?
Yeah, I had a question on this. This question actually is, there's a lot of things around disaster preparedness and resilience, and how much of that is that you're looking to cover here or not. So, that typically hasn't been something people think of in such like a climate area, but it's definitely a big piece of what we're seeing nowadays. And it's every day now, right? So look at today where there's a atmospheric river which is doing mud flows in Central California, and it's pretty much how do you prepare for that, and they're all related to climate. So
or they're exacerbated by climate. This is some of the it's hard to find the sort of climate specific impact that's generated, but instead you find that, well, climate change increases ambient air temperature that exacerbates heat, or it can lead to larger rain events and longer periods of drought. And so a number of these concerns may be already addressed in your safety element or your emergency management plan. The shift that's happened in the past few years is to just say, well, you also have to look at it from a climate change standpoint, or really you have to look into the future with the recognition that the climate is changing, and not just think like, things have always been like this, the temperature, the seismology, the, so on and so forth. So it's really to kind of say, are there any things that could be significantly worse? And, heat comes up all the time in almost all communities, and, preparing for heat. Other folks have talked about the concerns about switching to electricity and then, having it shut off through the public safety power shutoff. So these are just things we want to draw awareness to. Okay, Rose, your hand is up.
So I had a number of comments. We were talking about supporting biodiversity, and I came across an article recently that was done, I believe, out of UCLA, which evaluated native and non-native trees for their potential in terms of providing habitat and foraging for various flora and fauna, particularly migrating birds and native birds. And so I think that I would like to, I've already given that article to John, but I think that incorporating the trees that are most beneficial for biodiversity in our landscaping plans, both for the city and making the community aware of what choices are best for biodiversity so that residents can choose trees for their backyards and their own landscaping that can help our biodiversity would be a good thing to do. With regard to reducing heat impacts, we could look at building ordinances that require heat reflective building materials, permeable pavers, again, so we're recharging our water as much as possible and reducing runoff, and especially in the flooding and intense storms that we're going to be expecting as our precipitation comes in greater chunks. We could look at higher local incentives to keep our residents who are here working locally rather than having to commute out of the community. And my last suggestion, well, actually, I wanted to also support Bob Gerard's comments with regard to natural gas. It's a fossil fuel and it creates hazardous emissions in your home as well as out. Another reason for going all electric with our buildings, there's substantial indoor air pollution from natural gas cooktops and heating, which has a social justice equity component because it's more of a problem in smaller spaces that tend to be rented, owned by vulnerable people. 42% of children living in homes with natural gas cooktops experience asthma symptoms. And so we could deal with climate change and health issues and environmental justice issues in one fell swoop by building or requiring electric stoves rather than gas stoves in our buildings, and working eventually towards retrofitting buildings as well. And my last thing was, it's sort of a grand scheme, but in terms of a lot of the density, a lot of the development we've been talking about in our community is focused on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And given that the vast majority of the community is already built, I think we also need to be looking at getting people in our neighborhoods walking, because if we're only building on the boulevard, that encourages everybody who already owns a home in Thousand Oaks to go down to Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And that is encouraging driving rather than discouraging driving. So what I would propose is, especially with the pandemic, we have a lot of people who have transitioned to telecommuting, working from home, and I would imagine some of that will be permanent. So there are probably a lot of vacant business spaces around town. I think we should be focused specifically on looking at neighborhood centers that already exist, like shopping centers, where there is vacant space, and looking towards repurposing that so that with a goal of providing a neighborhood town square or community center that is ideally within 15-20 minutes walking or cycling distance of each of our neighborhoods.
Yep.
And building up a town square in those areas may be focused around a central piazza or a central park or a fountain with public seating where people could gather, which would also address Mary Ann's comment about community building. So we could put small businesses there. We could encourage farmers markets there on a rotating basis, grocery stores, and we could supply those town squares with bicycle fleets, electric bicycle fleet racks, so you could go from town square to town square. We could connect our bicycling paths and our walking paths to those neighborhood squares to make a whole network of neighborhood squares that are accessible by bike or by walking, sort of like the paths that they have in First Neighborhood, but throughout the entire community. And then we could use those town squares as hubs for our electric buses and public transport, not natural gas buses, to connect the various neighborhoods throughout the community and create a public transit network that also connects to the Civic Arts Auditorium, to our high schools, to our play fields, to our open space parking lots. And then the northernmost, southernmost, and easternmost neighborhood town square could have adjacent park and rides to connect to longer term, farther distance public transit to neighboring cities. Was there anything else I wanted to say about that?
That was a lot. It's quite a vision. So it's awesome.
And one thing I would say is we have a slide also about the upcoming meetings, but you know, with the kind of ideas and the vision that you have for, you know, alternative land use patterns, you should really attend the general plan meetings that are coming up on the land use, because those are certainly ideas that they would like to hear about. So
yeah, actually I've gone to pretty much all of the GPAC meetings. One other component that I wanted to add to those town squares, and I don't know if it originally came from Danny Chulak when he was running for city council or not, but the concept of affordable housing with shared spaces. So for instance, think a combination of college dorm, what else was I thinking? College dorms, where you have smaller spaces that are for rent, that incorporate like a bedroom, a bathroom, and maybe a small kitchen space or microwave, a refrigerator area, and then bigger common spaces for lounges and laundry rooms and kitchen areas, which would be particularly suitable, I think, for students and for singles and seniors even, who like to or need to the camaraderie of socializing, but don't necessarily want to care for a larger space or can't afford a larger space. And so those common areas could provide both socializing opportunities for those residents, as well as decrease the cost of buildings so that we could have more affordable housing. And if they were situated in our
Rose,
neighborhood town squares, everything's close together. I'm done.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. All right. I just have 3 hands up and just a few minutes to work with. So I want to hear from Danny and Clive and then Kim. And then we do need to talk about next steps. So Danny.
Yeah, so for me, I'll be quick. For me, the issue I think of most is excessive heat. So I know the city of TO, thankfully, over the summer had several cooling centers for senior citizens and more vulnerable communities to cool down when the heat rose. Also, just with these power shutoffs recently, I had a friend of mine in her 60s who had issues with her hip because of the cold and couldn't heat her house because her power is out. And so she had to drive around in her car, which obviously isn't good for the environment to stay warm. And so just thinking of additionally, when there's power shutoffs, places where people can go either to charge their devices or to keep warm, things like that.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Clive?
Yeah, actually two things. One, actually someone touched on it, but I think we are going to see post-COVID more distributed working, which will help on the commuting, but will have impact on office space and also issues like internet connectivity. So I think we should think about, what is the post-COVID work world and how does that impact going forward? Because I don't think it's going to look like it has looked. My main point though was, I hope this sort of fits under the thinking about stakeholders, and I'm labeled here as a stakeholder, but I think there are a lot more stakeholders around Thousand Oaks that we need to sort of think about who they are. obviously the big groups we talked about, CVUSDs come up and the national park comes up, but also other groups, community groups, but also obviously a lot more businesses who could be involved, but also things like HOAs who have big influence over large chunks of land. So should we do, as part of this, a much more of a sort of robust stakeholder mapping and start working out where are the sort of levers and the influences, back to that chart at the beginning, that the policy could work on and through to sort of really harness more action than just the council can do by itself.
No, I think that's a great idea. And if you have suggestions, send them along, please, like other groups that could be involved and we should be reaching out to. Okay, Kim.
Yeah, this is Jim Dawson, actually. Her husband.
Not Kim Dawson. Hi, Jim.
I'm here too.
Jim and Kim,
Yeah.
all right.
Well, my observation recommendation relates to housing density and population density. We recently completed successfully our ADU in our backyard, our auxiliary dwelling unit. During the permitting process, we were required to sign a form that said we promised to keep our main house as our primary residence. So my observation is that during the course of the project, we did meet one group from Los Angeles that was interested in investing in properties like ours to create the ADU and then sell off the property. So I would suggest, if you're interested in increasing ADUs in the area to increase, or allow population density and affordable housing as a social issue, I would suggest removing that particular promise from the permitting process that I assume wouldn't allow that type of investment in properties and ADUs.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for all of the comments and for all of the stakeholders and the public who have contributed to the chat, which I see has been quite active, along with everything that people have said. And just to remind you about the form that's there. And then I think I'm handing it back to Helen to just remind us what happens next.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. Really enjoyed a very active discussion. And as Walker pointed out, lots of chat going on that was very, very useful. And we'll kind of go back to that and pick up any points, comments that we missed. So we will, as you know, we recorded this and we'll review it and make sure that we've captured your ideas and thoughts tonight. We will have 3 more of these stakeholder meetings. Though actually, it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to engage both with stakeholders and the public. So let's hope that we're able to continue that way and get input from everybody. But they will be more focused on strategies to address. The first one for us will be February 24th, land use and transportation, specifically looking at strategies. And we'll probably be sharing some information with you before that to help get those ideas going in your minds. And then we'll be talking about energy. And then the third one will be focused on some of the other environmental issues, solid waste, recycling, water, environmental quality, things like that. At the end of that process, we do hope that we're able to have an in-person public meeting sometime at the beginning of summer, but we'll have to see how that shakes out. Anyway, before those 3 stakeholder meetings, there is the opportunity to participate in the general plan meeting, and that they're hoping to make that very participatory. So please go to the toaks2045.org site and sign up for that meeting. That's going to be very, very important in helping to shape the future of the city, and in particular some of the issues that have come up here to do with density and development, and how it should where it should be placed in the city, and how it should be aligned with transit and bicycles and things like that. It's to do with the circulation element as well as the land use. So I would encourage you to do that, and we will be in touch with you. We have everybody's emails. We will send you the information on filling out the form. We will also send you an opportunity to sign up for a virtual sort of one-on-one meeting if you would like further discussions along these lines. Otherwise, we will be meeting again a month from now. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right, thanks.
That's a wrap.
All
Okay,
right.
bye.
Thank you.